The following program is brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Harrisburg and the Catholic Communication Campaign. Visit us on the web at hbgdiocese.org.
Franciscan Media and this local station present American Catholic Radio, Disciples Called to Witness. Production of American Catholic Radio is made possible by listeners like you. And now, here's our host.
Welcome to American Catholic Radio presents Disciples Called to Witness, a program designed to help you know your faith so you can grow in your faith and share it. I'm your host, Judy Zarek. When I got married back in 1985, I received a gift from one of my friends that I still think about today. It was a plaque with a prayer on it. The title of it was Marriage Takes Three. The first verse goes like this: Marriage takes three to be complete. It's not enough for two to meet. They must be united in love by love's creator, God above. That first verse was a great reminder to me that what my husband and I did in front of all our family and friends on our wedding day was not only to publicly state our love for one another, but to state that we were basing our future on our love for God as well. The bishop's document on evangelization says that a culture of witness is sustained within the church through marriage and the family. So today we're going to look more closely at how we can help marriages not only survive in today's culture, but thrive. Because we know that if they thrive, that success greatly benefits their immediate family as well as the larger community. This whole idea of evangelization isn't some grand program that the church is going to implement and force every parish to be a part of. Evangelization starts really small, right in our own homes, within our own relationships. Our guests today will help us understand how we can nurture and encourage those relationships to grow in faith. In our Sharing Faith segment today, you'll hear Dr. Tim Hogan talk about some great ways to reach out and engage families in our parishes. And in our Discovering Faith interview, John Feaster will talk with Dr. Lawrence Feingold. Dr. Feingold will give us some interesting thoughts about marriage and family being at the heart of the new evangelization. And in our Call to Discipleship segment, Sharon Cross will talk with Archbishop Joseph Kurtz from the Archdiocese of Louisville, Kentucky. We have a great show lined up for you today, so let's get started and see if you can guess this week's Saint of the Week, who was a wife and mother and dealt with a family of her own.
Who am I? In many ways, I had a charmed life. A happy childhood in York, marriage at 18 to a fine man, a Protestant who made his living as a butcher, a large family, a comfortable home. What more could a woman in 16th century England want? For me, the answer came when I was in my early 20s. I converted to the Catholic faith, a dangerous step to take at a time in English history when the practice of Catholicism was strictly forbidden. My husband John accepted my decision and paid the fines I incurred by not attending Protestant services. He didn't even object when I turned our home into a stopping-off point for priests. Mass was offered there, in secret, of course. Yes, it was dangerous, but the Mass had become such a source of joy and strength for me. And I admit to something of a stubborn streak. I was not about to let the state control my religious practices. With God's help, I would live my faith as fully as I could, while keeping my family's safety in mind. Naturally, the local authorities were watching me. I got to know what the inside of a prison looked like. I was detained several times, once for 18 months for failing to attend Protestant services. I also visited people who had been in prison for their religion. Ironically, it was when I sent our son abroad to be educated, even that was a crime, that the authorities ran out of patience with me. They searched our house and tricked a young schoolboy into telling them what he knew, that Mass was commonly celebrated in the house. When they found concrete evidence in the form of vestments and missals, my fate was sealed. I was arrested and imprisoned in a castle, forbidden to see my children, and permitted only one brief visit from my husband. I did my best to remain calm and cheerful as I prepared to go before two judges for two offenses, sending a child abroad to be educated as well as the much more serious charge of harboring priests and attending daily Mass. The judges and I had a battle of wills going on. I refused to enter a plea, fearing that my husband and even my children would be pressured to testify against me. I was sentenced to be pressed to death. I learned the date of my execution only 2 days in advance. As the weight was pressed down on me, I cried out to Jesus to have mercy on me. My agony ended within 15 minutes. Who am I? I am St. Margaret Clitheroe, one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales.
You're listening to American Catholic Radio presents Disciples Called to Witness. Our Catholic faith must be reflected in our everyday lives if we hope to evangelize others. In our Sharing Faith segment up next, I'll introduce you to someone who is willing to communicate and witness that faith. Dr. Tim Hogan is a clinical psychologist who's had several positions. He served as a pediatric psychologist in a hospital setting. He was a high school teacher and a campus minister. He's presently the director of the Grace Counseling Center in Detroit, Michigan. In addition to psychological publications, he's written in the area of spiritual direction, and he has a passion for family and parish life.
There's several good studies about our culture today and the people who are doing these studies get to the end and they say, wow, we really need to get this right because the ship is way off course. You know, we're losing so many kids. They're leaving the church. They're not coming back when they hit their 20s. And I think one of the real keys, as the church has always taught, is that bridge that we build within families. First within husbands and wives, and then with parents and their kids. How we can cultivate attachment, both with our children, but also with our spouse. And I think one thing we ought to be asking ourselves as parishes is, what are we doing for couples? And not just the couples that are at Mass every weekend, but the couples that signed on so they could send their kids to the Catholic school, but are home, overwhelmed, overscheduled, struggling in so many ways. So we're never going to see them in the church. How do we reach out to them in a real practical way and help them have a passionate, wonderful marriage? I think that's a new bridge we need to learn how to build. What if, as a parish, we said, we're going to be the light on the hill to help marriages in this community thrive?
Once Christian marriages are attended to in the context of the parish, then the relationship between parents and their kids can be looked into. Dr. Hogan is married and has 3 children of his own, so the advice he has for us has been tested in his own household as well.
Some of the real basic things that I do as a psychologist that I share with parents is knowing how to capitalize on the rhythms of everyday life to increase attachment. When kids are young, or at least until they make a stop, to be able to go into their room, scratch their back, talk with them, maybe pray with them, or at least invite them to allow God to be the center of the day in a real joyful kind of way. Same thing at the end of the day, to be sitting on their bed and loving them up. Small things, rituals, I call them family rituals, ways of creating space so that connection can happen. Creating what I call epic events every year to plan one epic family event, some kind of adventure or something, a game or a treasure hunt where you do it together as a family.
When it comes to keeping kids active in the parish, Dr. Hogan believes a new way of thinking is called for.
I think we need to rethink mentoring because, disciples have always been formed one at a time. We tend to think programmatically, but how often are we going to get true disciples formed in a class of 15, right? I think it takes a one-on-one.
Keeping kids engaged in their faith is a constant challenge for parents and for the parish community. But one study done with 2,028-year-olds points to some possible solutions.
And the kids that stay are kids that have had what the researchers called an epic event in the church. That usually meant going away for a week of camp or a missions project, which thankfully are getting more and more common, or even like a weekend, intensive weekend, preparing for confirmation. Something that was outside of going to weekend Mass. Faithful weekend Mass attendance didn't predict anything for these 28-year-olds. A lot of families make their kids go, and that's the right thing to do, but it didn't predict the kids that are going to hold. But the epic events did.
The bottom line for Dr. Hogan is that we may just need to take a look at and possibly change the way we do things at our parish, our diocese, and even our home.
I really focus on us understanding culture because I think the biggest challenge is the way we've always done it. It takes incredible leadership to admit that maybe even things that we've always done, we've always had morning mass. Maybe instead we're going to have an evening mass and we're going to have it twice a month, but we're really going to do something around it. Maybe do less, but what we do, make it epic.
Some final advice Dr. Hogan has for all of us is to make sure that we're all doing what God has called us to do in our own families and parish. And if we don't know what that should be, then we should take a moment to discern.
I think we need to pray, and I think we need to just ask God, where is that area you want us to make a difference, that area of bridge building where to make a difference. Start by looking at the list of all the things you could do and write down 5. Then every morning for 5 days, pray with those 5 things and ask God, any of these might be me. Boil it down. Just do 1 or 2 things, but commit and pour into those 1 or 2 things and do them really well. One thing we can all relate with is feeling so overwhelmed because we are so aware of all the needs. We need to help people walk through a process, a discernment process, and help them clear out options that aren't going to work so that they can make a good decision and then commit to it.
For Sharing Faith, I'm Judy Zarek. Our United States Conference of Catholic Bishops is helping to guide us in the call to the new evangelization. They invite us all into a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ and His Church. This week, Archbishop Joseph Kurtz from the Archdiocese of Louisville, Kentucky, joins producer Sharon Cross and talks about the role of the Christian family in the new evangelization.
We're speaking today with Archbishop Joseph Kurtz of the Archdiocese of Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome, Archbishop Kurtz.
Sharon, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Give me an example of some things that the Church does to support marriage, maybe in the Archdiocese of Louisville or anywhere else.
One of the experiences we had, as you may know, I was very much involved with the development of the pastoral letter on marriage that the bishops issued in 2009. Mm-hmm. It was interestingly called Marriage, Love, and Life in the Divine Plan. And one of the things we found is that we tend to be very good in many ways at preparing people for marriage, but not all that good once someone gets married in enriching and nurturing that gift. What I have found in the last 2 years is there really are efforts to change that. I've been invited to be part of various marriage enrichment gatherings, and these are, I think, good things. Even with people's busy lives, if they can find the time in their family to carve out time for themselves and for enriching their family, it will pay dividends for them in appreciating the gifts of their family and being encouraged, and obviously in being good and credible witnesses to others. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it has been exciting and great to do that. Now, in many ways, like any church program, I've often said, as our Holy Father has said, the new evangelization is not just another level of programs. My gosh, it's really renewing what we're already doing, so that in some ways parishes are at their best when we simply are being grateful for the families right in front of us. When I was a pastor, for example, people would say, well, sometimes getting involved as a couple, husband and wife, in RCIA, while it wasn't directly enriching to the family, it was something that we shared, and that was indeed bolstering our family life. So there doesn't have to be directly marriage enrichment for something to be helpful.
The RCIA, of course, is the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults. Mm-hmm. And sometimes an adult will want to learn more about the Catholic Church, but they might be the only person in their family who is Catholic or even Christian. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of in almost a limbo place where they have a family, but their family does not maybe believe the same things that they believe. And is there a way we can help them to feel more connected?
Absolutely. First of all, I think people say yes to people. And what I have found is that when someone steps forward and feels called by Christ and becomes more deeply engaged in the life of a parish, even as you said earlier with the RCIA program, and they begin to be supported by other parishioners, the joy, if you would, of that kind of exudes, and often family members who themselves are not necessarily believers, they see the good happening in their spouse or in their mom or dad or child, and that's the best credible evidence of that sense of joy that comes from being with Christ and following Christ that can have an effect on others. It is true. I mean, there's no doubt about it that there are times when people can be almost heroic and they're not receiving support on things that we would want. But I do think that more often than not, their involvement in their faith tends to bring out the best in others if it's over time. I mean, people have to get used to ideas, and sometimes people have certain prejudices. They just have had bad experiences, let's say, in the past in what they consider not good Christian and credible witness. So, but I think the RCIA has been a great place to be a support to people in any case, even if they struggle within their own families.
Now, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
Well, I'd like to just go back, if I can, to that very notion of Christ calls all people to himself, and that even though the gift of our faith is extremely personal, it is never simply private. That in some fashion, in different ways, when Christ calls us to himself, he calls us also to be evangelizers, to touch the lives of others. And I think that's exciting, and it's going to work out in a different way for each person whose heart is touched by Christ.
Thanks for joining us today, Archbishop Kurtz. For Call to Discipleship, I'm Sharon Cross.
Studies show that people who pray regularly and practice their faith are healthier and happier. I'm Bishop Ronald Gaynor. I want to invite you to experience a positive difference in your life by visiting your Catholic parish and encountering Jesus through the sacraments. Do it for your family, do it for yourself, and come home. Remember that God's mercy is and always will be there for you, no matter what your situation. Visit CatholicsComeHome.org to find a parish near you.
I'm pregnant.
I can't focus.
What am I going to do with my baby?
My kids are hungry.
I can't work.
I'm scared.
I can't go home.
Can somebody help
Somebody help me.
In desperate times, there's a place for hope. Catholic Charities. We help families, children, and those in crisis throughout central Pennsylvania, regardless of your faith. Providing help, creating hope. Catholic Charities. This program is made possible locally by donations to the Catholic Communication Campaign and the Diocese of Harrisburg. Visit us on the web at hbgdiocese.org.
Next on American Catholic Radio, it's time for you to guess this week's Catholic treasure. How did the Second Vatican Council describe the Church? Here's a hint. It's a word that means sign. The answer is sacrament. In what was probably the most important document of Vatican II, the dogmatic constitution on the Church, the Council Fathers wrote, by her relationship with Christ, the Church is a kind of sacrament or sign of intimate union with God and of the unity of all humankind. She is also an instrument for the achievement of such union and unity. Catholics are familiar with the idea of sacrament from the seven sacraments that we receive. We know that they are outward signs instituted by Christ to give grace. Through those particular signs, God offers us grace, forgiveness, healing, nourishment, and transformation in our various states in life. The seven sacraments are powerful moments for every Christian who takes part in them. But the Council Fathers wanted us to see the Church itself as a general sacrament, a powerful sign through which God draws us into union with Himself and in turn creates a unity among all the members of the body of Christ. This work of God has always been in the Church's mission, but the Second Vatican Council gave us the language to bring that mission home. This Catholic treasure, the Church as sacrament.
You're listening to American Catholic Radio presents Disciples Called to Witness. Today on Discovering Faith, producer John Feaster talks with Dr. Lawrence Feingold. Dr. Feingold is Associate Professor of Philosophy and Theology at Kenrick Glennon Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. He's also the Director of Theology for the Association of Hebrew Catholics. He has his bachelor's, licentiate, and doctorate in sacred theology from the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome, Italy. He and John talked about how marriage and family are at the heart of the new evangelization.
Dr. Feingold, thanks for being with us today. We're going to talk about family and the new evangelization. And I thought for starters, maybe you could just help us to understand just what is it we mean by the new evangelization?
The new evangelization, in one sense, is simply the evangelization that the church has been called to from the beginning, but set in our time, and that's what makes it new. The evangelization of the church has to be ever new because the word is being proclaimed in ever new contexts. And so the contemporary world is a new context, and it calls for an evangelization that is appropriate to the contemporary world, and thus can challenge the contemporary world in all those ways in which it is, in some ways, hard of hearing of the gospel.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways it's the same evangelization, but in a lot of ways it's different. It's made for us right now, huh?
Right, exactly. And what especially characterizes our time and makes the evangelization of the church difficult is because we are a culture that is in many ways post-Christian. In other words, we're a culture that has already heard the gospel for centuries, but has increasingly thrown it off. And that gives an entirely new kind of challenge to the evangelizing mission of the church.
Yeah, so we talk about well, there's big words for it, secularization, but a lot of these put a big tax or strain on families, and that's what I really want to talk with you about. How do we evangelize in the context of a family? I know we all go to church, and that's a big way to evangelize, but there's things that happen at home too, huh?
Right, and they're crucial. They're the most important, because the fact is we receive our humanity from the family, from our parents. And we receive our social life, first and foremost, from the family.
Okay.
And what's received with our mother's milk, what's received in the context of the unique love that forms the family, imprints itself on us more deeply than anything else.
So, and we all know that love is another word for God. We know that from Scripture. So what I'm hearing you talk about is our experience of God is happening at home, huh?
Right. It has to happen at home first. Obviously, that's not dissociated from the church because the family is the Christian family is precisely the domestic church.
Sure.
The first place where we have contact with the church.
Yes, and that's an interesting concept to name. We've heard a lot about domestic church. The word is used a lot over the years, maybe more so in years past. But what exactly do we mean by the domestic church?
Great question. So the family is the domestic church in the sense that it's the first unit. The church exists on many. The church is gigantic, because the church is Catholic.
Sure.
But we first have contact with the church in the bosom of the family, and so the domestic church is the Catholic family in which the faith is lived and transmitted.
So we think of the church as the people of God. Sure enough, the people who we spend the most time with are going to be part of that, huh?
Right, right. And the church is the place in which the word is proclaimed and lived. And the family is the first place in which the word must be proclaimed and lived.
Now, how does that work? What do you mean the word must be proclaimed?
Right. So the word is the faith that we've received.
Okay.
And it's proclaimed in all kinds of ways. It's proclaimed through teaching, and so that could be catechism, through the teaching of prayers, parents to children. Praying together is the proclaiming of the word. But then the word is proclaimed in life, and that's the example of the Christian life. And the family is the first place where we see that.
So the domestic church is a place where we experience the word. What are some practical ways in our homes that we can be evangelizing as parents, parents to children?
Right. Obviously, the first way is bringing them to the sacraments, right? So the first way that we evangelize our children is by going as a family to Sunday Mass, and if possible, to Mass on other days.
Sure.
And so that would be the first and most important thing, is obviously the bringing the family. So when parents don't do that, when the kids don't go to Sunday Mass with their parents, obviously the family is not functioning as the domestic church, but hindering the children's contact with the church. That would be the first thing.
So I bring my kids to church, then what happens?
Right. And then the kids will watch whether your the parents' faith in prayer at church. In other words, it's precisely the parents participating interiorly in the Mass that's the most important witness.
For Discovering Faith, I'm John Feaster.
This is Judy Zarek here to wrap up this edition of ACR Presents Disciples Called to Witness. I hope you enjoyed today's show and got some good ideas about how to encourage couples and families around you. Maybe you got some ideas on how to build up your own marriage and family. It seems I'm always trying to figure out how to make everyone else happy. My kids, my siblings, my parents, my in-laws. I sometimes lose sight that first I need to make sure my marriage is strong, and then the rest will radiate out from that. And knowing that my husband and I are not alone in our marriage is a wonderful comfort. We have the support of others around us, and know our marriage started out with more than just the two of us. The last verse of that poem that I mentioned earlier in the show and received on my wedding day says a lot about how we can learn to evangelize simply by coming together as a Christian couple. It says, "A marriage that follows God's plan takes more than a woman and a man. It needs a oneness that can be only from Christ. Marriage takes three." You can find ACR archive programs and more on the web at productions.franciscanmedia.org, where you can contact us and also meet our production team. Sharon Cross, John Feaster, Ron Riegler, Chris Holmes, Kim Wessendarp, and our executive producer, Matt Wilgoss. Music for our program was composed and arranged by Bobby Fisher. I'm Judy Zarek. Join me next time for another edition of American Catholic Radio Presents Disciples Called to Witness.
American Catholic Radio, Disciples Called to Witness, is produced by Franciscan Media, a ministry of the Franciscan Friars of Cincinnati, Ohio. Production is made possible by listeners like you. Please visit our website where you can donate and find American Catholic Radio archive programs as well as other resources, franciscanmedia.org.